So we're going to look at a case study on the SBTi, which stands for the Science-Based Target Initiative. Now, we focus on the SBTi because it's one of the most respected net zero target setting standards, mainly because it is a science-based initiative. So we explore what we mean by the science-based and we delve into the science-based targets. Net zero is science-based if the reduction targets follows the current climate science. And also a net zero is science-based if the target reduction is ambitious following the 1.5 degrees C global warming limitations as per the Paris Agreement. So according to the SBTi, then a company's net zero target is credible and robust if it accounts for emissions throughout the value chain and the net zero target has both near-term and long-term targets. Also, it is credible and robust if the net zero limits the usage of offsets to between 5 and 10%. And any other financing as part of the net zero goes beyond the value chain. Science-based targets with net zero will come at a cost. And so it is essential for stakeholders or leaders to be able to deliver the business case for implementing a robust and credible science-based target net zero systems. Major reasons for pursuing the science-based target includes achieving business resilience and increasing competitiveness, the economy to achieve the net zero by 2050 at the very latest will go towards low carbon. And so companies that pursue towards net zero achieve business resilience. Also, to achieve the science-based targets would require a lot of innovation. And so companies that pursue the science-based targets achieve the level of transformation which is required to achieve the net zero targets. Now, as we saw in the MSCI, where we saw it was about 18% of companies that have achieved the science-based target compared to over 40% for the climate targets. So companies that achieve the science-based target improve their credibility. They demonstrate their leaders within the sectors or within the country where they are operating, and they show that they are industry leaders for their various stakeholders, whether customers, employees, or investors. And then fourthly, the net zero ambitions from various countries would be shifting various policies. And so companies, organizations, and businesses that have shifted towards the net zero or the science-based, robust, and credible are well placed and prepared to take advantage of the policies that are to be developed and be ahead of the market. So there are three main methods which are popular with companies that set science-based targets with the SBTi. And these methods include the absolute emissions contraction, the sectoral decarbonization approach, and the economic intensity contraction. Now, these will fall under the process of carbon budgets and how this is allocated, whether it's via contraction. Now, these methods will start with a carbon budget, which shows the carbon footprint of the organization or the company, and then it would go towards whether convergence of the emissions towards a goal or contraction of the emissions. We explore the advantages and disadvantages of these three target setting methods. So we delve into this to explore how the SBTi requires companies to set a target. So before we go into the various advantages and disadvantages. We explore the key characteristics of the various target setting methods. So we see the absolute reduction method, for example, and we see the economic intensity. So this is taken from the science-based target website. So we see the difference between the near-term targets and the long-term targets and the key eligibility of the various scopes. So we see, for example, the renewable electricity is only scope 2, which is applicable, whereas the absolute reduction is applicable to scope 1 to scope 3. And then you have the near term, which is the short term target, and then long term. So we have the cross sector, the various characteristics. So we have by 90% reduction here for the absolute. Whereas if you have the scope 3 economic intensity reduction, you have 97%, and so on and so forth. So we see scope 3 is applicable here for the economic intensity, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so this is showing overview comparing the some of the target setting methods. So what we have here is comparing from the advantages of the absolute target, the physical intensity and the economic intensity. So for the absolute, again, it demonstrates a strong ambition designed to reduce emissions. And then you have the environmental, robust, and credible to stakeholders. For the physical intensity, again, can be more in line with the emission reduction strategies and internal progress tracking, and then various reflecting the greenhouse gas performance may increase the comparability. And then for the economic intensity, is suitable for the fast growing companies compared to the slow growth companies. In terms of disadvantages, then the absolute, it doesn't allow comparison of the intensities of greenhouse gases. Target may be more challenging to achieve as the company grows, and growth is linked to the greenhouse gas emissions. So that has a limitations there. Then the physical intensity, there is a risk of being seen as less credible to stakeholders because absolute emissions may rise even if intensity decreases. And companies with different operation levels may find it difficult to quantify the physical intensity. In terms of economic intensity, then it may not correlate with the emissions tied to the physical process. So converting from economic to the physical activities may be a challenge, and then can be less environmentally robust due to the economic metrics like GDP and the inflation may not allow the ideal conditions for determining the economic intensity targets. So these are some of the advantages and disadvantages from the science-based target website. So from the SBTi page, we see scope 1 and 2 emissions on this occasion. So we see on the left, you have scope 1 and 2 emissions, and then on the right are the scope 3 emissions, upstream and downstream. So we can see some of the sectors, energy, information technology, and so on and so forth, where there is high aggregation of scope 1 and 2 emissions. For example, for the utilities, such a high one, and then for energy, you have the scope 3 emissions as one of the high ones as well. So this from SBTi was taken from the CDP data for the S&P 500 firms. So that's the source of that data. So this is just highlighting the breakdown of the various sectors emissions, primarily looking at scope 1 and 2, because we look at scope 3, the breakdown of scope 3 on the next page. So looking at scope 3 emissions, the categories of emissions, we see the levers that may be used to minimize these emissions. So we've seen these categories of emissions from category 1 all the way to category 15, franchises and investments. Now we see what are the opportunities to minimize emissions from supply engagement to procurement policy. So there's a lot of commonalities where we see procurement policy and supply engagement. And then as we go down, we see the product and service design, customer engagement, investment strategies as levers to reduce emissions in those categories of emissions. So, from the Science based target initiative, then how to set a target. These are the major steps of step one is to commit, step two, develop, step three, submit, step four, communicate, and step five, disclose. So we see the typical timeline of 24 months and so on and so forth. Now, a standard route for large companies and financial institutions, there is a separate route for SMEs or small and medium enterprise businesses. But for large organizations and financial institutions, then the first part is the company submits a letter to establish their intention to set a science based target. The company works on an emission reduction pathway, and then they submit the target to SBTi for SBTi to validate this. Once the company has been validated by SBTi, they communicate this and various stakeholders, and then the company reports its wide emissions and progress against the targets on an annual basis. So that's the key stages to set a target from the SBTi standard.